Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Convery. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Nathan Yeung here, a dynamic and visionary leader who's pushing the boundaries of digital marketing and operational efficiencies. Nathan is the Vice President of CMO Services at Find Your Audience Marketing Partner, where he's been making waves for over 7 years. But Nathan's journey is anything but ordinary. With a unique background that blends finance, consulting, and marketing, he brings a holistic approach to business growth. From navigating the complex landscapes of global marketing to building strategies that are rooted in operational excellence, he's consistently challenged the status quo and emerged as a thought leader in the industry. What also sets Nathan apart is his ability to act as a fractional CMO for medium-sized businesses in diverse sectors, from finance to healthcare to software and real estate. But there's so much more to Nathan than just his professional achievements. He's also a sought-after keynote speaker and a guest lecturer, sharing his knowledge at prestigious institutions like UC Berkeley and St. John's University. His passion for education and community is evident in his roles as advisory board member for the Telefilm Canada Talent Fund and his involvement with Pavilion as a core group lead. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a marketing professional, a student, or someone curious about the future of digital transformation, this episode promised to deliver a wealth of knowledge, inspiration, and welcome Nathan to the podcast.
Such a long intro, but thank you so much.
Got to give credit where credit is due.
My favorite thing about all of that is actually the talent fund stuff. I love, fun fact to start off. I have like 40 hours of acting classes at Armstrong in Toronto, and probably one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done my entire life.
I love that. I love that. I feel like I should have been in acting in that thing. I missed that boat, but anyways, I admire you for doing it. I think it's a cool outlet too. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, it's the coolest thing ever. And also teaches you that you do not look the way you think you do when you're having an emotion. And I think that's something that's incredible because it's like think about it. When would you ever just videotape yourself being sad or angry and then like look at the videotape and be like, oh, I don't actually look sad or angry and just be completely wrong.
Exactly. So let's hit some rapid fire questions, get our blood pumping here, and then we'll get into your story because I think your adventure in life is something that's really cool, and I can't wait to share with the audience. So, thinking about some rapid fire questions, what is your superpower?
Oh, jeez. My superpower is I just know so much about random things that I'm really good at making really quick analogies about random things. So
That's
I can bridge the gap between your interest and something that I'm trying to talk about really quickly, just because I've probably either read about it, experienced it. That's like I think a superpower that is not much of a superpower, but I find a lot of people are like, I don't understand how you knew that. I'm like, oh, I've read about it or I've done it, and they're just like, why? Like how?
That's cool. No, that ability to retain that content and then bring it back in various conversations, that's a very cool superpower. I love asking this question of the guests because smells is something like it invigorates thought and ideas and a feeling, but what is your favorite smell?
Oh, geez. Okay, I'll reveal something really personal.
Okay.
Um, yeah, this is totally personal. I grew up not with like a teddy bear or anything. I grew up with a blankie.
Okay.
So you're gonna ask me like, what is one smell that just like calms down my nervous system, brings? I'll be honest, it's blankie, man. Like I grew
I
up
love
with
it.
this thing that I held to death every time I went to sleep. My mom still has it. It's like in a protective coloring. It's old as it, and everyone can judge me. That's fine. But this thing has been with me my entire life, and the moment I even get close to that blanket and I smell it, it's just a waft of memories. It's so comforting. It's amazing. If you were to really ask me like what's that one smell that can calm me down, it's that smell, like 100%.
No judgment here. That is a unique smell, and it's the first blankie I've had on this podcast, so I
It
think it's
is.
great.
It's hey man, it's the thing
I
that I
get
had
it.
growing up as a child. Like how can you not associate all that comfort with that?
It brings you back. It brings you back. Thinking about compliments, what is the best compliment you've ever received?
Oh wow, that's a great question. What's the um my best friend Sherry gave me this compliment just recently, and I love her to death. I consider her a super communicator.
Awesome.
She says, I love how you are so willing to be honorable and vulnerable because I would never
Wow,
want to do that to myself.
that is
And I
amazing.
laughed and I was like, you mean because I get hurt all the time? And she's like, yes. And and, and she's like, but she's like, that's what's amazing about you. And it was just nice for my best friend to
Yeah,
highlight that part of my personality.
I think that's an awesome compliment. And vulnerability is such an underrated thing that people are afraid to show it. But man, when you do, I think you just deepen your relationship so much better. And that's awesome. She
100%.
said
Yeah.
that. That's great. Um, Guilty pleasures, go-to snack. What's yours?
Oh, guilty pleasures. I could right off the bat, it's gonna be like ice cream, chewy cookies. If you gave me a chewy cookie chocolate with a peanut butter ice cream in between, I would eat, I don't know, a ton of it, a full sea container worth of it. Like it's just ice cream and cookies, chewy cookies specifically. I will sell my soul for.
There you go. Now we know how to get to your soul. Thinking about school, it doesn't matter, high school, university, whatever. What was your favorite subject?
Oh, wow. Geez, that's a great question. You know what? In high school, we had this like really funny business class, and I actually really enjoyed it. I think entrepreneurship at BCIT when I went
Yeah.
was really such a great class, because it was so unorthodox. And I don't know if it was because my teacher was lazy or because he actually wanted us to learn. But in our entrepreneurship class, the class was curriculum was basically, you're going to start a business by the end of this class, figure it out. And that was it. It was, and you know, I remember when I went in that class, I was like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah, figure it out." And I think that was a great class actually. Like it was incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
But I loved it. So both of my business classes, both in school, I had a teacher called Mr. Nowak.
Yeah.
He was great. And then Rick Kretsch from BCIT was my teacher, and he certainly challenged us.
That's cool. That's cool. Business. So, um, jobs. This journey in this podcast is all about inspiring, young talent, people transitioning to new careers, jobs. But we all start somewhere, right? So I started scrubbing pots. That was my first job at like 14, and I like almost could fall into pots. I was such a small kid. But what was your first job? Like, what was the very first thing you remember doing as a job?
So can I clarify,
Yeah,
job or like volunteer? Because I also did a lot of volunteering.
it could be either. It could be either. Yeah.
So I volunteered with 5-year-olds when I was 14. I have like 120, 200 hours just like at summer
Wow.
camps with them. And I suppose that was a job, right? I had to show up, I had to take care of kids. I
Yep.
loved that. I didn't actually realize this until I had my child, that some of my colleagues have never actually really entertained children before. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't know that was a thing. It was very natural for me to deal with children, whether it was my younger cousins or my nephews, or me at 14 taking care of a bunch of 5-year-olds. So it was very, but that was kind of, I guess I would say, probably one of
Yeah.
my first jobs where, I was a supervisor at this kind of day camp, and we would have to take care of the 5-year-olds all day. That was kind of my first job. My first corporate job was AR, accounts receivable and accounts payable clerk.
Okay.
So basically just putting stuff in envelopes and marking things
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. Gotcha. I
Yeah.
was gonna say that first job experience with the young kids and supervising them, not much different than corporate America. Just apply those transferable skills to the office, right?
Yes, less crying, more tantrums in corporate offices.
Yeah.
That's probably
There you go. There you go. Less
corporate
crying.
offices in the sense of like passive aggressiveness is actually how it changes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, if you had to pick just one word to describe yourself, what would it be?
Oh, wow, these are such great questions. One word. I'm gonna say I'm pretty darn curious.
I love that.
Yeah,
Curious. It's a good
I'm
one.
pretty darn curious. Yeah.
All right, let's jump in. I've been looking forward to this conversation since the first time we met, and I wanted let's start with like the guy behind the name Nathan Young. Who is he? What gets you excited? Who are you?
I'm one of those 5 a.m.ers. I wake up at 4:30 every morning. I work out twice a day. I am a carnivore diet right now. I bulk and cut every year. People think I'm absolutely crazy. So for anyone listening, I literally change my weight by 20 to 25 pounds every year purposely. And for anyone that's listening, I highly recommend that you actually try this. Why? Because the anxiety of weight gain goes away. So remember when I said I
Yeah.
really enjoy my cookies and my ice cream? I enjoy it to the fullest extent now because I have no concerns that I can go back to being lean because I can just enjoy it now. I can
Yeah.
enjoy my food in fall when everyone's having gravy and everything. So I'm a big workout fanatic. I would say just like health fanatic. I want to be
Yeah.
healthy. I'm a big body optimizer,
Yep.
meaning like I really enjoy learning about things about my body and how to optimize that. I'm a big um, I was a big gamer. I say that was because I don't have the time to game anymore. I wish
Okay.
I did. Toby from Shopify, by the way, if you ever read his bio, still games. So damn, I wish I was like him, but I just don't. I haven't found that perfect balance because maybe I'll have to stop working out a little bit more because then I'll
Yeah.
have time to game. Um, and I like I love learning. Like I love it when I meet people and they go, "This is my job." And I go, "I know nothing about that. Tell me more." Like I'm so like I love when I meet people and I know nothing about their life or what they do or a hobby that they do. And I like find a lot of interest in that. And I think that's something that I really strive for. So I love having those deep conversations. I love
Yeah.
challenging myself. And acting was like perfect example of that. Like I loved it. Sarah Middich Armstrong. I remember one time during my scene, she literally said, "Nathan, that was absolutely horrible," and I felt great. I was like, "I will do better." and uh, and so I just recognize that. Like, I think I like a challenge.
Yep.
Um, and that's who I am. I'm a go getter. I definitely go all in or not. That's my personality. So if I'm going to do something, I'm gonna try to do my best. I'm not a perfectionist. I've learned to stop being a perfectionist, but will I have the intention to put in all the effort that I can to do well? Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah. No, what a cool insights into you, but now we're gonna get deeper. So I gotta say, your career path is like a crazy roller coaster ride through finance, consulting, marketing. How the heck did you prepare for all these twists and turns and any wild stories from your college days that hinted at some sort of adventure?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the wild story, and this is a story that's very true, and there's people that can attest to this. So I was finishing my BBA, and as a part of that program, you have to do rounding out courses. So I was taking, like biology and English
Sure.
and blah blah blah, right? So in order to get this job in China, I did something pretty crazy, and I don't think I've actually said this on a podcast. I've told this story to many people though. But when the iPhones first launched, it was impossible to get iPhones. And then more importantly, the iPhones in North America versus the iPhones in China, specifically in China, were actually different. The ones in China were locked. They were not the same.
Gotcha.
They were. I don't know if there are hardware differences, but they were definitely different. And so I had found out that the chairman in China was wanting iPhones. So he had contacted all these like really important people, like partners, lawyers, all these places to try to get iPhones from North America. No one could get it from. I called my best friend, Julia. I'm going to name all these names so that I can tell them when
Cool.
I talk about them.
Yeah.
I called Julia. I said, "Can you do me a favor?" And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "When the iPhones come into your store, can you just do me a favor? Just don't scan them. Don't put them into the POS system." And she's like, "Okay, why?" I was like, "I'm going to buy them." And long story short, they came in. She called me like 15 minutes before my last final, which was a biology final, which was, I can't remember if it was 2 to 4 hours long. And she goes, "Hey, they came in. You've got 45 minutes before my manager comes in and they're going to get scanned in no matter what." And I was like, "Oh, that's an issue." She's like, "Why?" I was like, "I'm going into my biology final. It's kind of long." Long story short, I finished my biology final in like 30 minutes. And I actually have someone that I forgot was in that class that remembers this because as I'm walking down, I hand in my final. I get 89% on that final. Someone in the front row goes, "WTF?" And I walk out, I buy the iPhones. 1 week later, I'm in China. I deliver the iPhones, and I'm like, no one in North America are you iPhones. I got you iPhones. I want a job.
Are you?
That's how I got my VP of Finance job.
Wow. That is so cool.
And I
Holy,
went to Shanghai
yeah,
with luggage, and
yeah,
my mom had no idea where I was going. She had no idea how, like, she knew I was going to China. She knew that I had a visa, but she had no idea where I was staying. She had no idea who I was staying with. I feel terrible thinking about this, how scared she was, and
yeah.
because I was in China, and she literally like had no idea why I was going. And that's what I did. So I wasn't the VP of Finance immediately. I was kind of just like a general do whatever he tells me to do. And then a role came up and he's like, we need an English speaker
Yeah.
who knows finance. Can you do this? And I was like, yes. And I couldn't. The truth is I was not qualified. I was the farthest thing, but I did everything I could to be qualified. And I did that role for a year and a half. And it was probably the most taxing thing I've ever done in my life.
That is an amazing story. I love it. I love it. Man, what a risk taker. Just like throw it to the wind and go like that. That's cool.
I know how relationships work in China, and do you do that, they're going to do something.
Yeah, you're golden, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Spill the beans. You call yourself a consumer psychology geek, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when did this obsession start? And like, were you that kid analyzing like cereal box designs while everyone else was trying to fish out the toys in the box or what?
No, I think I think that's just my curious nature. I kind of, I'm also someone, I like to think that I self-reflect, although there's some studies saying that only really 15% of the populations are self-aware. So I don't know if I fall in that
Interesting.
50%. Maybe I'm just lying to myself. But I certainly like to be self-aware. I certainly like to understand psychology. And I love marketing, and I love the complexities around marketing. And I use consumer psychology all the time, especially when I'm talking to people, because I think a lot of people discount how much psychology plays in marketing, because I think they just don't see the exact connection, but
Yeah.
it's quite an obvious connection if you look at it. And I wanted to learn more, which is essentially how I became a consumer psychology geek, because I wanted to write a book. So I was like, hey, if I'm going to be a marketing expert, I can't just learn from experiences, and learning from experiences is great, but I should be rooted in something that perhaps is scientific. Because then at least I can say it's like primarily from something that you fundamentally can not really argue with. I think some
Yeah.
people are very quantitative, and I'd be like, fine, here's the quantification behind why you make these decisions. And I just started doing so much research. Honestly, I went through 200 different research articles around basically literally every bias you can think of. And I wanted to understand, why do we have this bias? What causes this bias?
Interesting.
And that's the whole premise of my book, which is, kind of just around the whole theme of we're kind of lazy people. And if you really think about life, it's easy to see why we're like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting perspective. So I know you've tipped your toes pretty much in every industry out there, but B2B SaaS marketing won your heart. What's your story there?
We work with like one of the largest, and I'm gonna say with some trepidations, probably one of the more harder clients in the SaaS world.
Yeah.
We work for Constellation Software. Constellation Software is, we don't work for them because they're the most decentralized company you could possibly work for. In my opinion, I've never been in such an organization where decision making is so decentralized and so autonomous on a business unit perspective. So we work for a couple of their portfolios, and we work for the companies that they own. And what's crazy about them is they typically buy, I'm going to say, uh, maybe sometimes sunsetting, usually maturing,
Okay.
or companies that have not been a feature leader for the last couple of years. And so therefore, a lot of the times their marketing funnels are not mature. They're not built out. And so it's an incredible challenge. So I'm privileged to work with them because I get to see a ton of companies in very tight verticals.
Yep.
For example, one of the companies that we were talking to was a ERP. So for those that don't know, it's basically call it a really fancy accounting system, but just specifically for convenience stores. Never knew
Hmm.
that was a niche, but it was. And we work for one of the largest companies that services the software for how you actually take designs into physical print that's woven at textile machines, and the machine that translates your digital into the actual intricacies and constraints of a physical machine is a company we work for. Again, an industry I would have never known existed. So what's beautiful about working with CSI Constellation Software is they have all these super niche down vertical SaaS companies, and I get to learn so much from them, and I get to learn how to market them, which means I have to learn about their business, their industry, their competitors, their customers, and it's been a fascinating journey. And since then we've grown. We work with now a couple companies that are similar in the same
Yeah.
business model of CSI, which is they acquire SaaS companies, and we help them figure out how to make their marketing function into a bit of a value generator. I'm going to steer away from the term revenue because I
Yeah.
think that's too pigeonholed.
Yep.
Marketing can be a value generator in the sense that it can generate value internally in the organization, but also externally in the sense of generating revenue.
It's a good way to look at it I never really thought about it. Everyone always talks like sales and marketing goes revenue. You never really get someone talking about the value generator. I love that concept. Makes a lot of sense. So think about maybe some of the students who are listening, and I'll use these words because I know they say this to me. They're freaking out about choosing a career. Any words of wisdom on finding that spark for these young people?
Oh, be curious and
Yeah.
don't assume. Don't assume. I think so many times people join companies and they aren't curious enough to understand why a role is built in a certain way. And you have to recognize that every role, no matter how junior or senior, whatever that training you have is done for a reason. What other lack of training you have is also there for a reason.
Absolutely.
And rather than criticizing yourself to death about how you're not getting anything out of it, I would really recommend that you criticize yourself and ask yourself, why are these things not here? And come up with your own reasons so that you can learn from that. So if there's a lack of training, come up with the reason to yourself as to why is there a lack of training, and that's your learning
Yeah.
versus sitting there sulking that you don't have great training. You will always find something inside of an organization to learn from, and I think no matter the job you get, you're going to take away as much as you put in. And so if you check out too early, then you're right. You will have wasted your time and you will have not learned anything. But if you commit and you really start looking at it in a perspective of a business, not your role, you will start to realize there's a reason for everything. And that reason is a learning for you. And that's a reason that you could change in the next organization you're in. That's a reason that you could build into your own organization as you build something yourself. But I think it's really important for anyone that's job hunting or switching jobs and things like that. You never think that you're not going to get a takeaway. There's always a takeaway, but you got to invest into finding that.
What a great insights, because I recently had a conversation with a young person who's doing their internship and they kind of felt like it was boring. They're just doing this bunch of stuff and it gets repetitive. And as I was listening, I'm thinking, okay, but now that I speak to you, I wish I had kind of this kind of conversation because, well, what can you do about making that different? Like, yeah, maybe the daily tasks are repetitive and that's what the internship set up to do, but you push it back onto yourself to figure out what I'm hearing here is how you can make more out of it. Maybe there's other things you can do there. Maybe there's another way you can learn something about the company. And I think what you just said is so helpful because let's face it, you and I both have had jobs, still have, where things are repetitive and things are sometimes not so exciting, but sometimes you got to do those things to do the other cool stuff too, right? But you got to take it upon yourself too, right? I love what you said there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that intern, the question is why is your role repetitive? What is it that they're scared of? And maybe that's a conversation you could even have with your manager at one point is, hey, I've noticed my role is super repetitive. Is there a reason behind that?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why I'm not allowed to have any autonomy? And they'll go, yeah, because we're scared that you're going to make a mistake. We don't have the time to manage you. There's a reason why that role is made into that way. And if you can figure out that reason, you learn something, and what that is that some companies actually want the talent, but they don't have the talent to supervise. So what ends up happening is the role becomes very scoped down. That's a learning that happens. Why does that happen? That's how you start to understand a business versus just yourself.
Yeah, really great advice. Thank you. All right, let's talk networking. We always talk about networking, and you seem to have it down to an art. Do you guys have any like killer networking hacks for maybe a shy college student who's terrified on LinkedIn, or maybe how you built your known networking out when you were just starting out?
I have never talked about this on a podcast. So Brian, I mean, this
Okay.
is the first time. This is the first time I've ever brought this up.
All right.
I've talked about this, and I've mentioned this to a lot of my friends. I call it the 70-20-10 rule. And the 70-20-10 rule is 70% of your day is full of BS. Like going to the washroom, going to work, eating, groceries, whatever. Like 70%
Yep.
of your day. That's your 9 to 5. Call it like your actual working hours. Okay. And that's reserved for all that stuff, work included. 20% of your day is reserved for your friends and family and your activities. And 10% of your day, this is controversial. I call it your dirty little secrets. I call it dirty little secrets because it's easy to remember, but really it's what I would say things that you're passionate about, but you might actually feel a little ashamed to share with others. So it's very private to you. So for many CEOs, that's gaming. It's like there's like a nuance around that, right? You're a CEO, you don't game. Toby's like, I game all the time, but not everyone, is Shopify, right? So you don't get that right. But some people are ashamed of something, so they do something in their personal time they don't necessarily share. And I say in relationship building, especially in business, if you're getting a coffee meeting during the 9 to 5, you're nobody. You're transient. You're just a transaction. That's all you are. If you can have dinner on a Thursday or Friday night, you're in the 20%. Which means not only am I getting a business value out of you, I like you enough where I consider you a friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where it means I want to spend time with you in my personal time.
Yeah.
I consider that my personal time.
Yeah.
Weekends included. Sorry, I should be including my weekends here. It's not just Thursday, Fridays. And then the 10% is, can you share something authentic between you two that they would not share with others? And if you can do all three, you have a relationship for life. You have a relationship for life. If you only can get coffee meetings during work hours, you are nobody. You are purely a business transaction. If you can have dinners, if you can go on vacation with them, if you can take away their personal time, you have built a relationship. If you can get to this 10%, which don't do this manipulatively, there's ethics involved, so don't do this for the purpose, right? That means you have a long-lasting relationship. That means you have something deeper than what most people can get. Because sometimes even family members don't even know what you do in your spare time, right? I know my family doesn't know exactly everything that I do. Because sometimes I just don't want to share it with them. And so I call it the 70-20-10 rule. And when you think about this and you add value in people's lives, you have to remember anyone that can add value in that 9 to 5 is transactional, meaning you're a commodity. And I don't mean this in a mean way, but just in the sense that really anyone can do it. Anyone can do dry cleaning. Anyone can fill up your gas. Anyone can do any of that. But can you compete where rather than having dinner with your friends, you're a part of that friend group, or they're willing to substitute that friend group to hang out with you? And that means you're adding more value. Not only are you adding the value from the 9 to 5, which could be business and could be important to them, but you're also adding some sort of tangible relationship value that's important to them, whether that's through trust and honesty and authenticity. You align to moral values, like whatever. And then if you get to the 10%, you've likely found a friend for life. And that's how I view networking, in the sense that if you only can do the business, you're honestly a commodity, and you will not be chosen to spend time with, and you will not build a relationship, because I say frequency Frequency builds familiarity. Familiarity builds trust. So if you can't be frequent
Yeah.
enough for someone to build familiarity, and you can't have familiarity because you're not frequent enough, then you're never going to build trust. And if you don't have trust, you can't have a deep relationship. And if you don't have a deep relationship, then you will be placed into the transactional bucket, which means you're a dime a dozen, which means if you message me or if you email someone, they're not going to make you a priority. Right. And so
Yeah.
if you don't look at your life in that sense, and this is again not meant to be a manipulation tactic,
Right.
it's
Right.
meant to be a mindful tactic in the sense that you have to be mindful of people's time and respect that they have competing things in their life, such as groceries. And you have to understand that when you take time away, especially as people get older and have more responsibilities, so like all you kids and listening right now, you're in university, man. You don't got a lot of responsibilities. You got to deal with like a leaky roof. You got to deal with like a broken chair that your wife's yelling at you about, or your winter tires that are burning through the 34 degrees of Celsius of summer. You've got some responsibilities you got to deal with.
Yeah.
You are a substitute for that, and you have to recognize you have to add more value than that. So if you don't just recognize that just as a person, then you will have challenges because you will just be self-centered and you think you're worth someone's time. But that's not actually what's happening. It's just that they are you everything is a substitute for them, right? You
Yeah.
choose to go to dinner, you choose to go to lunch, you choose to work. These are all choices.
That is a really, wow. I've not heard that approach. And I think it is a really deep one to reflect on because I'm thinking about some of the relationships I've built over the years too, right? And the ones that do dig into that personal time because I make that time, definitely they're a standout. Absolutely. There's something there that's it, and it's mutually beneficial, right? I think that has to be part
Yeah,
of it too, because you can feel when it's one-sided,
you can.
right?
And I think a lot of people sometimes go, well, doesn't that just make a relationship more like like not authentic? And I go, well, yeah, but that's kind of like you saying $1 is not tradable for another dollar. Like it's a substitute. It's just a cost trade-off. Like
Yeah.
you choose to go to sleep earlier because you recognize that watching Netflix till 2 a.m. does you no good.
Yeah.
Like you make conscious choices for everything you do, and spending time with individuals has a value to that. Whether you have bothered trying to equate that value into some quantifiable metric that's standardized, no, because you're not Spock from Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
You're not like that. There's emotions involved, but you internally know why you spend time with people because they make you feel good. And there's no
Yeah.
value to that, right?
Yeah. No, it's a great takeaway. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about fractional. It's like the new buzzword, right? We're all doing it now. But as a fractional CMO, you're like a marketing superhero that's like swooping in to save the day. How do you, I mean, because cultures at these different organizations can be so dramatically different. So, how do you kind of adapt to all these different company cultures? And I also would like to take a spin on it, like for young students or people thinking about establishing themselves in company cultures, like how do they figure that out? Yeah.
um,
Is it,
Trust
yeah.
and just being aware that you know that you're going against the grain. If you're coming into any culture as an external, you got to recognize you're a threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't matter, even if the C-suite is like, Nathan's not a threat, I'm still a threat. It's kind of like the sad story of how I always like to think that I'm not the boss within my organization, so everyone will be transparent with me. That's an incredibly hard thing to get over with. Like, I don't think that wall will ever disappear. So it's just like you have to just accept the reality is that as an external person, you are facing challenges, and that's your job to navigate. And you navigate that through trust. And how do you do that through trust? Well, you do that through having empathy with their role. It's like, hey, I understand that you're in marketing and I understand that you've been doing marketing for last year. My job here is to help you. My job is not to take your job away. My job is not to take or change what you're doing right now. Now it might change in the future, but
Mhm.
my job right now is to download from you because they feel like maybe I might have a better perspective, but I want to make sure that I'm here to collaborate with you. And that's a very collaborative approach versus like, hey, do you mind just sending me all your stuff? I need to review it. Right. And the other thing that's really important about culture is you have to recognize your uh your deliverables and your outcomes are only going to be as good as your stakeholder buy-in. And if I don't have stakeholders across the organization buying in, you can trust me when I say this, you are going to meet bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks are going to stifle your ability to move forward. And when they stifle your ability to move forward, you know what ends up happening? There's a lack of progress. And you know what people feel like when they have a lack of progress? They typically think you suck.
Yeah.
And if you suck, you're going to have another problem where the rumor mill starts going on because they're not aware as to why you have a lack of progress because someone in one department just refuses to give you stuff or cooperate with you or book meetings, which could be a critical path in your project plan to something else. So I think it's really important that when you join any organization, you come in with the open eyes. It's your job to prove that you're there to help. It's
Yeah.
your job to prove that you can actually transform their organization for the better. And it's your job to provide them progress. And it's your job to provide them visibility on that progress. Because no one wants, Dave Forrester, ex Army. I was about to say Marine and screw that up again. 20 years, he says it. You can't eat an elephant, you got to eat it bit by bit. So you can't go in and say, I'm going to provide transformation. We're going to be a huge company. No, you got to bite size it. And when you do that, you get stakeholder buy-in, you get confidence, you get trust, and you have better culture. So I think the
Wow.
simple thing is don't
Yeah.
go into with ego or you're going to get bit.
I, such good advice. Like the bite-sized change, transformation, the building trust, so huge. The ego, like I'm always about, like I don't know. I think that that does damage a lot of cultures and relationships because like
Absolutely.
park those at the door. Who cares what your title is? Who cares what, right? But I think for young people venturing into their first job, there's this exploration going on in their head, and they got to take all these things into account because, you know, how you did stuff in school and how you did stuff is not necessarily how it might be happening in the workplace, right? So you really
Yeah.
gotta, I always say, like, you gotta read a room, you gotta see what's going on, you gotta get to know people, they gotta get to know you. Um, really good advice because I think that's sometimes the challenge. Young people tell me too is like they want to make an impact and a difference right away, but some of it you need to kind of observe a little before you try to make your mark, I think.
Yeah. And and I think like a lot of students tend to go into jobs and then they go, "Oh my God, I know it better." And when I say this, you might be right. You might be right. But here's the issue. One, you have no authority to change process typically. And two, there's always a reason.
Hmm.
So rather than spend all this time thinking you're right, I really recommend every student that goes into a job where you might know a better process
Right.
and you might factually even prove that it's a better process. Rather than spend all your energy on going against grain of which will likely get you fired, um, figure out why. Why is it not changing? What is the constraint that you're not aware of that's making sure that this process is not changing? And if you can prove that, then you're more likely going to be able to change the process versus just saying it's wrong.
Like with
And you'll get a
data,
ton of
right?
learnings
Like with data and information, right? Too.
with data or information, or maybe you actually don't know everything, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's an operational reason. Maybe there's a budget cycle. Maybe there's a contract in place. Maybe there's a relationship with a manager that's being moved out, so they can't change that policy yet. There's all kinds of reasons why sometimes things are broken, and sometimes they are broken for a reason. A good example is Some companies stay with ERPs, which is an enterprise resource planning software, which again I've said is like kind of the heart of some
Yeah.
organizations. And sometimes they stay with a legacy one. And here's why. I can give you a great example. A CFO for a company is not going to risk their job to remove the heart of an organization, even though they know that heart has a runway of 2 years left, because it's so risky.
Yeah.
So you have to then go, well, why is this not changing? It's like, because the CFO will get fired if it's bad. That's why,
Yeah.
right? So there's a reason why for a lot of things, why things don't get done. And I say this because I work in a ton of SaaS companies and I can
Yeah.
see how hard it is to make change. So I think for students, it's like, you're right. There's probably always a reason, but find out the real reason to why it's not being done. And then you're going to get some more learnings. That's where you're going to really learn where what you learn in school and what happens in reality in the workplace is not necessarily always the same. And also free, like what you learn in school is free of emotion,
Yeah.
right? It's in a textbook, right? In the real world, you deal with emotions, you deal with people's lives at stake,
Yeah.
livelihoods at stake, right? This is very different.
Absolutely. And thinking about school, let's talk a little bit about that, because I know, um, you know, we both have been involved in formal education, and I've been involved, and you've been involved, work integrated learning, internships, co-ops, kind of things. And I think that model, like the co-op model, the internship model, it's been around for a while. I mean, I was a co-op way back when, right? At IBM at the time, way back when. Um, and but beyond that, what do you feel like schools, post-secondary educational institutions need to start to be thinking differently about to prepare this generation for like that real marketing world, or the real world of business, or the future of work? I mean, it's here now. I'm just curious, like, do you have any thoughts about those listeners? Because I know there's listeners here also from those universities,
I'm going to get
colleges.
flamed because I should probably know his name. The CEO of NVIDIA had a lecture at, or I can't remember if it's graduation lecture or something,
Yeah.
but he said something. He's like, 99% of you will fail because none of you are resilient.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if there is one thing that I think schools need to teach is it saying that I have in my company. I was like, you will fail at this company if you are not comfortable in the unknown. If you are not comfortable in the unknown, you will not perform at this job. You will not do well, because not every problem you are given will be prescribed a solution.
That's right.
And often it will be your job to feel comfortable to navigate something of which you do not know the answer to find yourself at a solution that's likely to provide the desired outcome. And I think sometimes in school, it is too prescriptive, in the sense that everything that we do in school is standardized. And so therefore, there is a roadmap to get a desired outcome. But often in life, that's not what happens,
Right.
right? When you have your car break down in the middle of nowhere, you are not taught, well, you were taught how to critical think. And hopefully, if you've taken any project management classes, you'll know the steps that you might have to start thinking about once your car breaks down. And you'll start thinking about your constraints, and you'll start thinking about your external constraints, and you'll start understanding what are your next steps. But that anxiety that you get, that analysis paralysis you get, where perhaps you are just not comfortable in this situation, and therefore you are unable to make decisions because your entire life has been prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think schools fail. I think schools fail at teaching people to be resilient. And being resilient means, to me, navigating the unknown until you get to an outcome.
It's a great piece of advice, and great thing to think about, because we talk about resilience, but the way you described it and the way it gets applied and the way we think about it is super valuable. Let's talk about this prescribed. You and I talked about this before we even got on the
Ooh.
podcast, but let's talk about this prescribed idea around the fact that I even called it pre-programming. Like we all have this sort of thing where this is the normal way that you go through life, right? You know, you go to high school, then you go to post-secondary, then maybe you get married and then you have a kid and you buy a house, or maybe, you know, everything is very prescribed if you actually let it happen to you. Um, and 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 I know where this question is going to go because I could tell you will push you will push the boundaries on that because it's important, because you're curious. You keep saying you that's what you are. I'm the same way, but I see so many people who are scared of not doing the normal thing, or not being a part of. So what is this normalcy thing that we talk about, or how we end up in this place where I think it reinforces just the status quo. But what's your thoughts around what is normal and what is or what is this pre-programming thing that we're all exposed to? Any thoughts?
I think what is normal is our human tendency to want to fit into a
Mm,
group.
hmm.
And we often strive for normality because we feel like if we reach a level of normal, that we will be accepted into that group. And so therefore everything's fine. But then we get into this endless loop of like what is normal. And if you think about this in just psychology, not consumer psychology, but
Yeah,
just psychology purposes, this is external validation to a certain extent.
gotcha. Yeah, yeah,
And we often lose sight that we have to validate ourselves and we have to trust in ourselves and we have to believe in ourselves. And I think we struggle with that because then we start asking, well, what is right and what is wrong? And we start using all of these frameworks we've been taught, whether it's ethics, morals, beliefs, whatever systems we've been brought up with, to try to help navigate that. And then we get in this endless loop of, well, if I'm just dictating all this myself, is that right?
yeah,
Or is that wrong? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. I think there's ethical things, like I shouldn't be, um, Jack the Ripper and killing people. That's the bad thing, right? I'm not a good person. And ideally, hopefully, in your head, you go, that's not what I want to be, and I don't think that's not a good thing to do. But you could also just be a people pleaser and you think that's a good thing, but it's actually not a good thing, right?
yeah.
Because you're externally validating yourself because you're scared of other people not accepting you. And so there's this unfortunate feedback loop where you're constantly in this battle of like, what is right, what is wrong, what is right, what is wrong. And I think at the end of the day, having a child really centered this for me is, what is ultimately going to make you happy?
Mm,
What brings happiness to you? If you were on an island by yourself, okay, with no external validation, like Tom Hanks was without the volleyball,
yeah, I'll
um,
say.
what would make you happy? What would make you happy? And if you can come up with those things, then that's where you should be focusing your energy on. And that's where, you can say, I'm happy when I can support my friends, because there's something about being there for my friends is so important to me. Knowing that when I pass, that my friends are there at my funeral and that's my legacy, that's important to me. It's like, okay, well, what do you have to do to support your friends? Well, I need to be emotionally available. Okay, well,
Yeah,
emotionally available means you have to probably not be burnt out from work. Okay, so probably need a job that's not not 12 hours, 20-hour kind of days, right? I need to have some money so I can spend time with them and I can be there with them and I can enjoy these experiences with them. Okay, well, how much money is that? That might be $90,000. That might be $120,000. What job could possibly give me that and this? And you can align yourself this way. And I call this living with intentionality. And I know
mm,
very few people that do that because it's incredibly difficult. And the reason why it's incredibly difficult is because there's a ton of cognitive dissonance that comes with that. And for those that don't know what cognitive dissonance is, it's the fact that you have an ego, but your ego and your actions sometimes do not match, and so therefore you have like a mental conflict with it, right? It's
yeah,
like, I'm a really really smart person, but in order for me to live this perfect life that I've just dictated by what makes me happy and the money I need to do that, means I have to leave the city because Vancouver is not a great city to have this job or these job opportunities. So I have to go to Alberta. But the cognitive dissonance says, but you're a smart guy. You're a smart person. You should be able to figure this out. So you should stay here. But the logic, the actual intention should be like, you should move to Calgary and just take this job because it actually would literally checkbox all these things. So you battle with yourself on this ego. And I think, we all do this. And I think the goal here ultimately for everyone is figure out what makes you happy and just try your damn best not to listen to your ego and go for it. Because your ego will hold you back. Your ego will hold you back because of shame, stereotyping, expectations, all of which some may be yours, some may not even be yours. And if you can find happiness, like that's the best thing you can have in life, because they changed that amount of money that, like, the happiness is thing. They were saying it's $150,000 or 200 grand or something now, and then after that, happiness kind of doesn't really change that much.
Yeah.
So the reality is money isn't going to actually drive that much happiness. Everything else in life will drive you far more happiness. I know many people who have a lot of money, and I'm not necessarily going to say that they're any happier than the people that I know work just regular jobs. Sure, they get to have wild experiences, but those are peaks, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to average out happiness in their life, they probably have a ton of peaks and valleys, right? Whereas
Absolutely.
if you live a 9 to 5 and you're earning 120 grand or $150,000 in a senior role after 8 years, and you have this happiness because you have a family and you have kids and you live this non-extravagant life, you're always going to have this level of consistency that they probably don't have because they're living this crazy life of extravagance where they see these peaks and valleys. So really challenging the idea of what is normal, really challenging the idea of why do you live, and I think happiness is a perfect way to navigate life.
Wow. So much to unpack there. I love that we went there on this conversation, because yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of it about myself too right now, even in my own career and life, and what's important. And when you talked about that island, the things that came rushing into my head were not the job, not my car, right? It was all those other important factors that you look to appreciate every day, and hope that you appreciate, but sometimes you miss it. Especially if
Absolutely.
you're on an island. I have I don't know if we could take it one step further, because that was a really great, almost a great moment to leave on. But I just want to ask you, um, if in case there's something that we covered a lot of ground, but is there anything that you wanted to share that I didn't ask, or that's something else that you want to bring up? But I could have ended it right there with that that analogy and that thing, but about happiness. But you tell me. We got a few more minutes. What would you have to
The
share?
last thing that again I haven't done on a podcast. Shout out to Bram Wachowski. I think he just sold his second company again. Who invited me to George Brown to do this talk, and I brought up this equation, and I'll bring up this equation in this podcast. Emotional stability comes with you being good with yourself and good in your soul, and I think it's really important that if you want to be resilient, you need to learn how to be emotionally stable. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but hear me out in the sense that if you want to be productive in your life, you have to remember every day you wake up with 100 units of willpower. And if you don't have any emotional stability, you're not going to be able to use that 100 units. You're going to maybe only use 50% or 20%. And this equation that I came up with that I want to say on this podcast, because your audience is fitting for this, is my equation for success is willpower times emotional stability. So it's a factor, it's a percentage, plus knowledge equals output. And if every day you can generate more output towards knowledge, it's a circular equation in the sense that it compounds on your knowledge, which means your output gets greater. So the more knowledge you have, the more output you can have in a single day. But this is all dependent on your emotional stability. If you have none, then you get nothing out of your day. And that's why I think resiliency is so important, because I think anyone can do anything they want. There's so many stories of people who are resilient, so many founders, their stories are highlighted as successes, but no one highlights the resiliency required to get to where they are.
Yeah.
One of the major founders of an ISP company in Toronto is a good friend of mine, Chris. And sorry, Chris, I'm going to share this story. He lived on SO points cards. No one talks about that. For
Yeah.
1 week, he had no money and he had to live off SO points. And you don't hear these stories enough. Bram, when I was at giving that lecture, he gave his story about how he had to watch TV shows, intervention specifically to make himself feel better. These are all things that we do in order to be resilient, to try to get out to the other end, because we know we can. But if you can't get there, you're going to get stuck. And so,
Yeah.
I wanted to share that just because, Brian, I know your audience, and I've shared some things I have never shared before on a podcast
I
today.
appreciate that, man.
So
Thank you.
I hope that this gets distributed, and I hope that students learn from me and learn from my mistakes. But the one thing that I will say to everyone also is, everyone that's listening, I know that you can understand, but trust me, you will probably not action on anything that I have said until you feel, because in order to believe, you must feel, which is the same saying as, oh, that's hot. And then it's like, oh, it is. I know it's hot, but I won't believe you until I actually burn myself. So trust me when I say this. I know that my advice sounds useful, but unfortunately, some of you might not necessarily ever action until you actually feel it. You feel it to believe it.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Because when you feel it, you know it,
Yeah.
right?
And it becomes actionable.
And then it does. That does. Nathan, I am so thankful for you doing this podcast, and thank you for sharing so many ideas and thoughts, and also just being you like you are. I feel very fortunate to have met you and been able to do this podcast together. I think can't wait for future opportunities to collaborate. But thank you so much for being a part of this. It was really great to have you on, and thanks for being just being you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great.
Awesome. So, for our listeners, if you like what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network on Spotify. Give us a rating, and also follow us at Coffee with Convery on Instagram. You'll find all of our podcasts there, with all of our fantastic guests like Nathan. This has been Coffee with Convery, and until next time, please stay well.